If Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz shut down for weeks or months, it stops being a regional conflict detail and it becomes a global economic event. A strait doesn't have to be physically blocked to be functionally closed. It only has to be too risky and too expensive for commercial shipping to use. And the long-term story isn't just missiles and ships, it's insurance, escorts, mine-sweeping, negotiation leverage, and which countries get carved out for passage. I am Mandatory Fun Day, and this is your Snapshot Report. Here's what we know. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important maritime choke points on Earth. It's a narrow corridor that a huge amount of energy shipping depends on. When people say Hormuz is closed, they usually picture a literal barricade. That's not how this works in real life. A modern closure is usually behavioral. Shipping companies decide it's not worth it. Insurers jack up rates, crews refuse, ports slow down, tankers anchor outside the danger zone. Trade starts behaving like it's wartime even if nobody announces a formal blockade. So the first thing to lock in is the definition. A long-term Hormuz shutdown doesn't require Iran to stop every ship. It requires Iran to make enough ships stop themselves. And that's why this story has global weight, because even partial disruption changes pricing, supply chains, and politics fast. The question here is Iran trying to stop all shipping or trying to raise risk just enough that the world pressures everyone into a deal? But how could Iran keep Hormuz shut long term? Iran doesn't need to win a classic naval battle against the US Navy to keep Hormuz disrupted. Iran's long-term play is usually about persistent friction and strategic uncertainty. Here are the primary tools Iran could use to sustain a functional closure over time without turning this into a single clean fleet versus fleet moment. They could use maritime harassment and intimidation. This is the day-to-day tool. The goal is not necessarily to sink everything. The goal is to make shipping feel like it's operating under permanent threat. And that can include warnings and coercive communication, aggressive maneuvering near commercial vessels, boarding threats, or selective seizures to create fear. The strategy is simple. You don't have to punish everyone. You punish a few in a visible way so everyone else changes behavior. And this has a long-term advantage. It creates delays and uncertainty without requiring Iran to burn through a massive missile stockpile every day. If Iran is choosing longevity over spectacle, is harassment the most sustainable way to keep traffic throttled? Number 2 is naval mines, and it's the cheapest big effect tool. Mines are the quietest and most disruptive tool in a choke point. The most important thing about mines is not just the mine itself, it's the fear of the mine. Because once there is a credible mine threat, shipping doesn't just keep going like normal. You get slower transit, lane restrictions, convoys, constant inspections and verification, and the requirement to do mine countermeasure work that takes a lot of time. A mine problem becomes a tempo problem, and tempo is exactly what matters in a choke point. If traffic slows by half, the strait can be open on paper and closed in practice. The question here is, does Iran need dramatic attacks, or does it just need persistent mine anxiety that throttles traffic indefinitely? Number 3 is anti-ship missiles and coastal drones. You're always in range of those. Iran's coastline and geography give it the ability to threaten shipping lanes with anti-ship missiles, drones, and other standoff systems that create persistent uncertainty. Iran does not have to fire constantly. It can use the threat as leverage and spike the risk at moments of its choosing. That creates a pattern that shipping companies hate. You can't plan around it. You can't say, it's safe every Tuesday. You have to assume risk is always present. And even when defenses are strong, the attacker's goal isn't guaranteed hits. It's risk pricing. If 1 out of 10 attempts gets through, or even if it merely looks possible, you get the economic effect Iran is looking for. The question here is Iran trying to destroy ships or trying to turn every voyage into a rolling crisis management decision? Number 4 is attacks on nearby ports and terminal infrastructure. This is how you keep the strait closed without even focusing on the strait. If loading terminals, port approach lanes, or offshore infrastructure feel vulnerable, shipping stops even if the waterway itself is technically navigable. And the long-term effect is bigger than one ship. It's the behavior of entire companies. What ports do they trust? What lanes do they avoid? What crews will even sign contracts for these routes? It's a ripple effect. The question here is the real closure point the strait itself, or the ports and terminals that make the strait economically useful? Number 5 is cyber and misinformation as a force multiplier. This is where modern conflict gets extra messy. Iran doesn't need cyber attacks to turn off the world. It needs cyber disruption to amplify uncertainty. False incident reports, spoofed alerts, port system disruptions, ship tracking confusion, or cyber incidents that make insurers and regulators more conservative. Add misinformation on top, rumors of mines, rumors of strikes, rumors of next target lists, and the decision makers on the commercial side start acting like the worst case is already happening. This is how a choke point becomes a psychological weapon. It's not just about what is true, it's about what seems plausible enough to change behavior. Does Iran need to achieve full denial or just enough confusion that commerce self-restricts? There are some obvious long-term effects if Hormuz stays shut. This is where the story stops being military analysis and becomes global reality. I'd break the long-term effects into 4 lanes. Lane A, energy shock and price volatility. If Hormuz stays closed or throttled, energy markets don't just move, they whiplash, and you'd expect price spikes, rapid volatility in future markets, governments releasing strategic reserves, and political pressure on leaders as fuel costs rise. And it's not just gasoline, it's everything connected to energy. Shipping costs, manufacturing costs, food costs, and inflation pressure. Countries that import most of their energy feel this the fastest. Countries that export energy can benefit economically, but even they can get hammered by global instability and trade disruption. The question here is, how quickly does regional conflict become global cost of living issues for voters? Lane B is shipping and insurance crisis. This is the silent killer. Once war risk insurance premiums rise enough, the question becomes, can you even afford to ship? Will insurers cover you? Will your company accept liability? Will crews even sail? Even if some ships continue, the throughput slows. And when throughput slows through a choke point, supply chains back up like a traffic jam you can't reroute quickly. This can produce second-order effects. It can produce container delays far from the Gulf, shortages of specific inputs, and a general sense that the global economy is less predictable. The question here is, does the global system break from physical attacks or from financial risk pricing that makes normal commerce impossible? Lane C is a political pressure cascade. If fuel prices rise and supply chains slow, leaders start doing math in public. And that's never good. How long can we tolerate this? Who can negotiate? What concessions are acceptable? And what can we trade for stability? And this is where Iran's leverage grows, because global pressure doesn't only hit Tehran. It hits Washington, it hits Gulf capitals, it hits Europe, it hits Asia. A prolonged Hormuz shutdown creates a weird political dynamic. Countries not directly involved militarily begin demanding an off-ramp, and they will push that demand in every form they can. The question here is, does a prolonged shutdown force diplomacy, or does it just spread the conflict's political consequences to everyone who buys fuel? Lane D, military posture shifts. Convoy warfare returns. If the shutdown persists, the military response isn't just more ships. It becomes escort systems and convoy planning and mine countermeasures at scale, constant ISR coverage, and rules of engagement debates that governments will argue about publicly. And a long-term closure creates long-term military commitment, because the world cannot tolerate the choke points being permanently hostage to risk. If Hormuz stays shut down long-term, does the response become temporary escalation or a permanent new security architecture? What happens if allied countries negotiate for passage, though? This is where the story turns into a geopolitical sorting mechanism. Which house are you going into? Because if the strait is closed and then certain countries can still get ships through, you get a 2-tier global trade system. Here are the likely ways that can unfold. Scenario 1 is selective safe passage. Iran signals explicitly or implicitly certain flags companies or countries can pass, others face higher risk. That does 2 things. It rewards the countries that stay neutral or aligned. It pressures countries that oppose Iran by creating economic pain. This is not just about ships. It's about splitting coalitions. The question here is, does selective passage reduce the temperature, or does it normalize coercion as a bargaining tool? Scenario 2 is passage for price. This is where safe passage becomes a negotiation token. Countries or companies might seek arrangements that include formal commitments, back-channel diplomacy, or indirect concessions that get framed as de-escalation steps. The danger here is precedent. If passage becomes something you buy through concessions, then every future crisis teaches actors that shutting choke points is an effective leverage strategy. Does paying for passage solve the immediate crisis but encourage the next one? Scenario 3, proxy and partner carve-outs. Aligned actors could negotiate corridors through intermediaries or regional relationships, not necessarily public treaties, but practical understandings. This could look like quiet arrangements for certain shipping networks, commitments not to transport certain categories, or politically framed humanitarian and essential trade lanes. The effect is the same, though. The world fragments into shipping winners and losers. The question here is, if carve-outs happen, do they stabilize shipping or fracture international alignment? Scenario 4 is third-party mediators. This is where states that already play intermediary roles could negotiate deconfliction arrangements. Not peace, not victory, just a limited set of rules that reduce immediate economic harm. That's often how wars become manageable without being resolved. The question here is, if mediators reopen traffic, does that end the crisis or just put it on a schedule? The video is not yet over, but I want to tell you about the mandatoryfunday.com. So on the mandatoryfunday.com, you can get all my merchandise. Every shirt and hat that I wear in the video is fulfilled by Ranger Up, which is a veteran-owned and operated company. Once again, we bought it back. I'm now the CMO and one of the owners. You can also see all my veteran-owned business partners, and today I want to tell you about the Veteran Lending Group. The Veteran Lending Group closes 87% VA loans for homes and land. You can buy, you can refinance, or you can build. They can do anything that you need to do with real estate. I used them to buy the house that me and my 4 daughters live in, and now, over a year later, I literally can still ask almost anyone on their staff any question I need. If something's leaking or broken, or I need help, they always help me out. They truly made the home buying process incredibly easy. So go check them out. People are stealing my designs, so the only place to get them is a link on the mandatoryfunday.com. If you're seeing them anywhere else, that's not my merchandise. That is somebody ripping off my stuff. So please don't buy that. Let's get back to the video. What are the second and third order effects that matter long term? These are the effects that don't show up in day one headlines but reshape the future. Number one is permanent war risk pricing for the region. Even after the Strait reopens, markets may keep a higher risk premium baked in. If companies learn that a single actor can throttle one choke point and shock the world, the region becomes more expensive to insure and operate long term. Number two is defense spending shifts toward choke point warfare. A prolonged Hormuz shutdown would accelerate demand for mine countermeasures, counter-drone systems, coastal defense defeat tools, and escort capabilities, as well as rapid repair and port resilience. In plain language, countries would buy the tools that solve the problem they just suffered. Number three is energy diversification would likely accelerate, not overnight and not magically, but sustained crisis pushes policy. New supply contracts, more pipeline and terminal investment, and strategic reserve reforms, as well as faster movement toward redundancy. Number four, the shadow shipping ecosystem would grow. When choke points get unstable, you often see more gray market routing, shell ownership, and who even owns this ship type of problems. This is how maritime security becomes a global compliance and enforcement nightmare. The question here is, does a prolonged shutdown create a one-time crisis or permanently change how the world prices and secures energy trade? Here's what this will probably look like. If this becomes a long-duration shutdown or near shutdown, the pattern likely moves in phases. Phase one would be shock and pause. Shipping would slow, prices would spike, insurance goes wild, governments then scramble. Phase two would be escorted adaptation. Convoys and escorts become routine, mine countermeasures increase, traffic resumes partially but slower and more expensive. Phase three would be negotiated carve-outs. Some countries push for passage deals, mediators seek deconfliction, and the world starts sorting shipping risk by politics. Phase four would be structural change. Governments and markets would adapt, new contracts, new infrastructure planning, new defense investments, and new rules for how crises get handled. What I would watch for next is traffic behavior, anchoring, clusters, reroutes, and pauses. I would watch insurance, war risk premiums rising or falling, formal statements about passage, any hint of selective safe transit. China's already talking to Iran directly, trying to negotiate a deal with them. And then mine countermeasure deployment. Scaling up is a sign everyone expects duration. And then I would also look out for mediator activity. Talks about channels opening specifically about shipping. So here's the bottom line. A long-term Hormuz shutdown doesn't have to be a perfect blockade to be devastating. It just has to make shipping feel unsafe long enough that the world changes behavior. And once the world changes behavior, the costs go global fast. Energy, trade, insurance, politics, and military posture. If aligned countries start negotiating for passage, that may reduce immediate pressure, but it also risks creating a two-tier trade system where coercion becomes rewarded. That's the long-term danger, not just the shutdown itself, but the precedent it sets. If you want my broader weekly global breakdown, tying this conflict to defense spending, procurement, alliances, and the next flashpoints, go watch Worldwide Wednesday. And if you found this useful, do me a favor and send this video to a friend, and then watch another one after this. Those two things help push the content way further into the algorithm. I'm Mandatory Fun Day, and this was your Snapshot Report.